Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for the fourth annual Delaware County Sustainability Conference hosted by the Delaware County Office of Sustainability. My name is Sudie Pompeo, and I am the Assistant Director of Sustainability Finance. I will be serving as your host for this session, providing important information to ensure that your experience, both in today's session and throughout the rest of the week, leaves you feeling informed and inspired. First, with some housekeeping items. This session will take place in a Zoom webinar format, meaning participants will be off camera throughout the duration of the presentation. Questions are encouraged and will be addressed following the presentation. To ask a question, you may either type in the Q&A box found at the bottom of your screen or click the Raise a Hand button if you would like to ask your question out loud. Questions will be answered in the order in which they were received, or if we are seeing multiple questions of a similar nature, we will bump those to the front. We will do our best to ensure that all questions have been answered. However, we will be ending the session at the top of the hour. Now, to kick off our session, we are very excited to welcome Kate Clifford, Pat McCarthy, and David Schreiber, who will share their presentation, Reviving the Past for Sustainable Futures, case study of the Lazaretto Quarantine Station and the sustainability of adaptive reuse. Kate Clifford is a preservation planner with the Delaware County Planning Department. In addition to working on identifying and protecting historic resources, she works with historical organizations and municipalities throughout the county. She is the staff liaison to the Heritage Commission, runs the Delaware County Historic and Preservation Network, the DCHPN website, and is the grant administrator for the rehabilitation of the 1724 Chester Courthouse. In her spare time, hopefully she has some, she is the president of the Haverford Township Historical Society, member of the Lansdowne HARB, and a tour guide for the Preservation Alliance of Greater Philadelphia and Historic Rittenhouse Town in Philadelphia. Pat McCarthy is in his 14th year as a commissioner in Tinicum Township, having first been elected in 2012 and has been serving as president of the Board of Commissioners since 2019. Prior to becoming a commissioner, Mr. McCarthy was a long-serving member of the Tinicum Township Youth Organization and leader of the township's recreation board for over 20 years. Pat is a successful small business owner, having been a self-employed flooring contractor for over 35 years. Pat resides in the second ward in Tinicum Township with his wife of 35 years, Patty, and is the father of Jack and Megan. And last but certainly not least, David Schreiber is in his 20th year as Tinicum Township's municipal manager, having been appointed in 2006. Prior to coming to Tinicum Township, Mr. Schreiber spent 25 years employed at the Wall Street firm of Merrill Lynch in various capacities, leaving as an assistant vice president in the Retirement Plan Marketing Group. David resides in Ridley Township with his wife of 31 years, Michelle, and has 3 children, Kyle, Samantha, and Ryan. Mr. Schreiber attended graduate school for International Business Management at Fairleigh Dickinson University. I knew I'd stumble over that. After completing his management and marketing degree at St. Peter's University. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Kate Clifford, David Schreiber, and Pat McCarthy.
Right. Thank you. Let me see. All right. Hopefully you can all see my screen. All right, so thank you all for coming to hear about how preservation and adaptive reuse is sustainable. Many of you have heard that the greenest building is one that has already built. In addition, adaptive reuse has existed since time immemorial. People have been reusing buildings for thousands of years because it is always easier and cheaper to use a building that already exists. Adaptive reuse is the reuse of pre-existing structures for new purposes to extend its history with a new and different chapter through reuse and reinterpretation. According to the Secretary of the Interior, there are 4 types of preservation, from least impactful to most. At a minimum, preservation is maintenance, keeping the same building in the same use in good condition. Rehabilitation is used when building needs to be adapted to a new user or use with some alterations, such as the 1724 Chester Courthouse. It's no longer a courthouse, it is a historic site, and we're rehabilitating it. Restoration is really only used for individual features or in the case of creating a museum or historic site. There have been many historic sites around the county that have been restored, usually in the 60s or 70s, in advance of the bicentennial, to create historic museum sites. Reconstruction can be used to replace a feature that no longer exists, and in rare cases, like Pensbury Manor, to replace a whole building. If buildings are maintained properly, then they do not need to be restored or reconstructed. We're going to focus on rehabilitation. Sustainability also includes economic feasibility, and Donovan Repkema is the expert on the economics of historic preservation. He and Place Economics have created a lot of reports about the economic feasibility of preservation and adaptive reuse. Studies have shown that rehabilitation is much more economically sustainable than new construction by creating new local jobs and keeping the money in the local community. There's also a smart growth grant that can be used by municipalities to help guide the growth in their communities. So you can go onto the Realtor Party website and learn more about the grants. This year's grant period has ended, but they will reopen again in January 26. One neat tool that has come out recently is the Carbon Avoided Retrofit Estimator, or CARE tool. Using it, you can compare the cost of a rehabilitation to new build. I used an actual example of a former school for sale in Folsom that can be used as apartments, and show that the carbon impact of rehabilitation is much less than constructing a new building of the same size and material. It's even much less than just keeping it as is. Delaware County Planning Department has created a list of how preservation is sustainable on our website, and the short link is at the bottom. It has a number of tools and resources that are available to both building owners and municipalities. There are many incentives for rehabilitation, and they can be stacked on top of each other, such as historic tax credits and affordable housing tax credits. Some of them are location dependent, such as enterprise zones or opportunity zones, but it's good to get an expert involved if you're thinking about using any of these grants and credits, because they can help you apply for them or help you find ones that would be special to your particular building type or location. Other incentives can be included in local municipal zoning codes for historic buildings. For example, Concord Township has conditional use provisions which allow uses that may not otherwise be allowed in a certain zoning district that can be used on historic buildings. So, if you're if you have a house that no longer you no longer want to use it as a house, you can open up as a B&B or a flower shop or any of these things. You just need to apply for a conditional use variance. There's also area and bulk regulations related to lot size and yard requirements if you're planning on constructing additions or new buildings. And cluster development can be used to help preserve open space and um, uh, and preserve the historic site within like a its u- its existing setting instead of completely surrounded by new construction. So here are some examples of adaptive reuse throughout the county. So these are all former houses that changed to something else, and sometimes more than once. So in the top left is a literacy center in Chester, and it was once a house, and then it was a funeral home. It's now a literacy center. In the bottom middle is the Aston, it's the Rhodes Elser House, and it was turned into a B&B, and then apartments and a shop, and is now a graduate dorm for Newman University. The top right you may be familiar with is the Willows Preserve, and that is open as an event venue and community use. So it was originally a house. And the county uses several houses for county offices. This is in Rose Tree Park and is used as the Parks and Recreation offices. Former schools that no longer meet the needs of the population can be easily adapted to housing or offices. You know that Upper Darby has two schools right next to each other, and they're used for the fire and police departments. On the top right is building in Collingdale was a former parochial school and recently got changed to senior housing. Both that and the one below in Upper Chichester received awards from the Heritage Commission for its adaptive reuse. In Delaware County, we have a lot of mills, and they can be used as a lot of different things, including like within the same building, they could be mixed use, or they could be all housing, or as you can see, a restaurant, or a wedding venue. And the one on the top left is a Brandywine River Museum, which is in a former grist mill. The Baldwin Locomotive Works had its offices in Baldwin Towers, and so it's still offices. And some of the outbuildings to the locomotive works are still being used for industrial storage. And some other mill examples, as I said, we have a lot. So many of like they're no longer used for mills, so they are used for other things. Um, and the top right is has recently changed a mill in Darby Borough was recently changed to housing. The King's Mills in the top center is a wedding venue in a former tapestry mill. Aston and Clifton Heights and Darby Borough have a lot of mills. And you may also be familiar with the Hedgerow Theater. Did you know that it used to be a grist mill sawmill? The bank buildings are unique in that they usually have a large banking hall, and that can be a feature that can be used for a lot of uses, such as a restaurant, or retail, or a library. We also have a lot of churches uh, that have been closed for various reasons or consolidated, and so they can be used as various purposes. I included the bottom two. Even though they're in Philadelphia, but they kind of uniquely use the large spaces that are available in the for the churches. Like there's a circus school in Chestnut Hill, and it uses the high open space of the church, which isn't available in a lot of other existing buildings. Many commercial uses buildings have been turned into other uses. Sometimes it needs a lot of creativity to know what you could use it for. uh, so like the middle on the top is the Rose Tree Tavern, and it was part of the Rose Tree Hunt Club, and now it's the visitor center for Visit Delco. And the similar tavern in Newtown Square is the Square Tavern, and that is open as a historic site. Now, we don't expect all the historic buildings to be turned into historic sites, but it's also used as an art gallery in the upstairs. Many institutional housing, such as convents and orphanages, can be used for market housing, offices or schools, or even township offices, such as in Concord and Thornbury. Lastly, these are very unusual types that need special care and thought to make them usable. The Chester Power Plant is a great example of using historic tax credits. A lot of time, adaptive reuse just needs a bit of imagination and creativity to consider what else a building could be and how it could be used while still maintaining the historic character. Many buildings that I mentioned are listed or eligible for the National Register, but all of them are listed on local historic resource surveys and can be locally protected. So it's always a good idea to check with us and the municipality before embarking on any project related to historic buildings. You may be familiar with the Trader Joe in Media, which is located in the grocery store and museum, and the Sun Center movie studios in Chester Township used to be a gymnasium. So we have an opportunity to adaptively reuse the Crozer Theological Seminary if the ownership situation could be solved. What uses could you think of for this building? It could be a lot of things. It has a lot of rooms in it. It has incredible national and local historic significance and is a huge building that needs a lot of care and money. It is eligible for historic tax credits and other incentives that were listed earlier. It's part of the whole Crozer healthcare sale, and we would love to see it reused as something that would benefit the community and the county. So if you have any questions about the presentation, or if you have a potential adaptive reuse project, I'd love to hear from you. My contact details are on the screen, and I'll also be at the conference on Saturday. I will now pass it over to Dave and Pat from Tinicum to tell about their adaptive reuse success story, which you can see in person on Saturday.
Well, thank you, Kate. Appreciate that. You certainly have a lot of credentials in your introduction. Pat and I, just a couple of regular guys working in an old building. So thank you, everybody. I am David Schreiber in the blue. Pat McCarthy, President of the Board of Commissioners, is in the red. And
Thank you, everybody.
we appreciate the opportunity to talk to you this afternoon. We're going to talk a little bit about the adaptive use that we've done in Tinicum Township with the Lazaretto building. It was once a quarantine station and a lot of other things, which we now converted to our municipal offices. And you've seen several examples of that in Kate's presentation of older buildings being converted into municipal buildings. So for those of you who don't know, the Lazaretto building is located right on the banks of the Delaware River, directly behind the Tinicum Township Fire Department, fire station. Anyone that's been to the Lazaretto Ballroom for either a wedding or some other event might remember that it's the older brick building right behind it, right on the river. For anyone who's a bit older, you might remember the Old Lagoon nightclub right on the river, also called the Deck. And older still, it used to be Walbers on the river. We're right next to those two old hotspots. Did you want to say anything?
No, you lead away and
Okay.
you do what we're going to do.
So the Lazaretto building, which started construction in 1799 and completed in 1803, was started in response to the yellow fever outbreak in the city of Philadelphia. During the late 18th century, early 19th century, there were several outbreaks of yellow fever and other diseases of the sort in Philadelphia. And they wanted a way to protect the big city from that. So the Philadelphia Board of Health said, let's do something further upriver after long discussion, they decided to build a quarantine station. What does that mean? So as ships would be coming up the river from faraway places, Asia, Europe, the Caribbean, etc., they would all be required to stop here at the Lazaretto building to investigate for any diseases, any communicable diseases. They would have the surgeon and the medical staff row out to the ships, check for any disease, either in the cargo or in personnel. And if any were found, they would be quarantined here for some time, either till the danger had passed or there was no more evidence of disease on board. And in some cases, never made it to the city, and in many cases, cargo was destroyed in order for it not to reach the city. And it operated like that from 1801 through 1895 as a quarantine station. Um, Pat likes to say that more people entered the United States through the Lazaretto Quarantine Station than in Ellis Island in New York.
Yeah, they say that 1 in 3 persons in the United States can actually trace their ancestors back through this building. So that's pretty remarkable if you think about it, out of all the people in the country.
And it's 94 years of existence. After that, I guess when medical practices got a little more advanced and they had better ways to deal with disease and what have you, the building became the Athletic Club of Philadelphia in 1898, where the wealthy and influential of the city enjoyed cycling, baseball, lawn tennis, and other activities of the day. And that lasted through about 1915, at which time a group of men began flying hydro airplanes, later known as seaplanes, and in 1916 established the Philadelphia School of Aviation, run by Frank Mills and his 3 sons until the year 2000, where they would actually train pilots, seaplane pilots, either for the military during World War I or just recreational pilots at that time. After Mr. Mills sold the property, it was a marina for some time, and the front lawn was filled with abandoned boats and mechanical parts, machinery parts, and what have you, until 2000, at which time a developer purchased the big property and was planning to demolish all of the historical buildings in order to put up a parking lot, a Philadelphia Airport associated parking lot. So, Joni Mitchell's 1960s paid paradise and put up a parking lot really was coming to fruition at that point. So, having heard of the plan for the property, the township subsequently got involved, trying to figure out how we can acquire the property, what can be done with it, etc. And in 2003, we entered into negotiations, took some time, and finally in 2005, the township became owner of the property.
And if I may, I'd like to give a shout out to Herbert McCumbee of McCumbee Engineering, who was instrumental. You can't say enough good things about Mr. McCumbee in saving this property. Without Herbie, this would be a parking lot, to be quite honest. And he's also president of Lazaretto Board for obvious reasons, but I'd just like to add that little tidbit. Continue on there, David.
Oh, thanks, Pat.
Okay.
So we acquired the building, the township acquired the building in 2005, and it was a mess. And it sat vacant until 2016. And of course, over that decade, it continued to deteriorate. As you can imagine, it cost quite a bit of money to renovate it, to do something with it. So there was a lot of planning involved and trying to figure out what we can do and how and when and all that. So finally, in 2015, the airport and the township came to some sort of an agreement whereby we would be collecting some additional revenue. And that gave us the impetus to start really renovating the building. We went out, we floated a $10 million bond through M&T Bank. That gave us the proceeds to begin construction. And in 2016, work began. So I just want to share with you my screen here if I can a second and show you what the exterior of the building looked like. Uh, can everybody see that?
Yes.
So, and that doesn't even really do justice to how the building looked. The front lawn
Yeah,
was full of trees, abandoned boats, mechanical equipment, all kinds of debris that people just had left there over decades and decades. It was full of weeds, trees that just had sprouted up, and it was just a mess. And that's kind of how it looked like just before they started actual construction, when they cleared up the front of the building. The front of the building is actually on the riverside, by the way, because that's where the highway was at the time in the 1700s, early 1800s. So that is what the building looked like uh, prior to construction, actual construction beginning. Let's see if I could bring. Oh, that's for later. So that's what it started. It would look like beforehand. Um, So we did issue the bond. Construction began in 2016. We had to do, as you can imagine, some remediation of hazardous materials such as lead, things like that. But as construction went on, there was a lot of features of the building that were saved. A lot of the original wooden glass windows, a lot of the doors, the original pine flooring, the molding, the craftsmanship of the molding, the brick, both interior and exterior. Was really, the craftsmanship was unbelievable. That it lasted 200 years in the state of neglect that it did, that it was in. Again, it's just a tribute to the craftsmanship of the day. Um, there was a big porch along the river that had to be removed. The cupola that's on top had to be completely redone. There was a dirt floor in the basement that was excavated. We took out 18 inches of dirt and then poured a brand new concrete floor. We rebuilt the chimneys using the original bricks, etc. Also on the property, there are several accessory buildings. There's the bargeman's house, which used to house the bargemen, the guys that used to row the medical staff out to the river. There's an outdoor kitchen. There's a carriage house. There are seaplane hangars. All of those we are in the process of rehabilitating as we speak. Of course, when you rehabilitate an old building, you must include modern features such as an elevator. So there were some drastic changes to the inside of the building to install an elevator. We had all new electric, restroom, sewer, HVAC, etc. And when all was said and done, um, this is what the building looks like now. Share. Can you see that there? That was taken from a seaplane. And you can see the front of the porch was restored. And to the left of the screen, you can see the seaplane base, which is actually being rebuilt now. The marina here is being rebuilt. Here's the bargeman's house that we spoke of. That's also being reconstructed.
they've removed somebody had plastered over that in who knows when, but they have removed the plaster covering to expose the original stonework, and it's absolutely amazing. We have a couple of craftsmen that are working on restoring that, and when that's done, that is going to be phenomenal to add to this project. It's really what you never know what is underneath until you take off the cover, and just what we're discovering is pretty amazing. So that's going to be nice. That should be done probably by the fall.
So this is what it currently looks like. And then to go back to before, this is what it looked like previously. So you can see tremendous change. Here the porch is missing, the cupola is in terrible shape, the windows are all boarded up, the doors are boarded up. And that's what it looks like now, building in the background here. And I think I have one more photo from the air. You can see another airplane shot of the building here. So We opened up the building we started in 2016 and we moved into the building on March 2nd of 2020. And if you think about it, it's a bit ironic. The building started as a quarantine station in 1801 and operated as such till 1895. And on March 2nd, we moved in of 2020. And the following week, we were in quarantine once again for a year. So it's ironic how it comes full circle. Although it wasn't operated as a quarantine station, we were basically in quarantine while we were working here.
Yeah, it was me and David were kind of running the show, and everybody else we were doing the whole COVID thing. So it was an interesting time.
So that's our story of adaptive rehabilitation. If you ever get a chance to visit us, there are folks here on Tuesdays from 1 to 4 that'll gladly show you around the building. The front of the building is a bit of a construction site at this point. If you could see past the window behind me, you'll see what I mean. The seaplane base and the bargeman's house and the marina are being rehabilitated as we speak, so we can get the front lawn all cleaned up and actually have it back to what it used to look like hundreds of years ago. Any questions? That's our story.
A quick recap with what David said when we came with funding. The funding it kind of came from the agreement with the Philadelphia International Airport. That gave us our funding stream. And one of the things with these projects is adaptive reuse. If you're using taxpayer money, you have to be able to justify the expense to the use. That's why if you look at the building from the Riverside, the whole left of the building is administrative offices. The right of the building has been transformed. And Kate was at the Preservation Alliance dinner that really set the light bulb off. We didn't know what we were going to do with the right-hand side of the building. And at that dinner we utilized the porch, and we utilized the right hand side, which is when you come to the building, you'll see it's big open areas. And we were thinking about renting it out and all that, but we discovered that it would have been a crime to rent that out and not utilize that space for educational and the different purposes that we're doing now. On the second floor, we have the Italian American Cultural Museum exhibition space up there that is a very big hit. Right now we have a display on the first floor from the Italian consulate that's been going until Thursday. I think they're leaving because you guys are coming in on Saturday. And then also we have the Swedish Colonial Society is also on the second floor with all of their artifacts and displays. So that's kind of where we're going with the other part of the building is for educational purposes and use for these type of things that we're doing now. That's what we want to do. And the same with the grounds out front and everything. We want to educate the public at large about what this building was and all the good things that can come about the adaptive reuse of property like this. As I tell everybody that comes here, this is a work in progress, and it's going to be a work in progress for the foreseeable future because all of us keep coming up with these different ideas that we'd like to incorporate into this project and into the greater area of Delaware County and Tinicum Township to however we can all work together to make these different projects come together. That's kind of what our thing of it is I've always been a history guy, David, and the rest of the commissioners are very much in tune with making Delco a really good place to live and thrive. So that's basically our story. We're a very welcoming community. Anybody who wants to come down, like David said, the first and third Saturdays, we also have tours from 11 to 2, I believe, and every Tuesday from 1 to 4. So please stop and visit us.
If anybody is interested, so Dr. David Barnes of the University of Philadelphia has written this interesting book about the history of the Lazaretto. It's available now. I'm not sure what the cost is, but I'm sure you could Google it and find out. But it's an interesting book.
Yeah, it's an interesting read. It brings you back to a different era, and you don't realize how small Philadelphia really was at the time. What you look at today and what you think when you read the book, it really puts it into perspective of how the water and the other thing about how much the waterfront was the pathway of that era. Everybody says, because everybody wants to come in the back door and say, why do you have the front door on the riverside? Then we explained it. the river was the 95 of that era. And then oh yeah, okay, I get it. So, but basically that's where we're at with our project. Any questions? Anybody have anything? Please shoot it at us.
Well, first, I'd like to thank Kate, Pat, and David for joining us today. Personally, thank you. This was fascinating for me. I so enjoyed your presentations. I have had the privilege of visiting many of these buildings and the quarantine station, so I am fascinated by this topic. And now I'd like to turn it over to Becky Yurkovich to handle questions. If you folks want to write in with questions, fantastic. We have plenty of time to discuss the things that were presented today. So let me introduce Becky Yurkovich, the County Sustainability Officer.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Sue, and our presenters. So we do have some questions in the chat. The first one comes from Jonah Harvey, and I believe this is probably for Kate. The question is, what are the implications for adaptations and fundraising when a nonprofit is using a historical structure, but it's owned by a third party?
Yeah, there's like basically all of the historic sites that are open to the public are not owned by the nonprofit that runs them. Most of them are owned by the municipality, but that provides an opportunity to get grants and other incentives that are available to both organizations. So there's some grants that are only available to nonprofits and some that are only available to local municipalities. So it allows you to get more if that is a case, you know, so like if it's a local authority, if it's owned by a private individual and a nonprofit is using it, you generally, like the nonprofit can apply for grants and other funding, but it just needs like a letter from the owner to say like, yeah, I give permission to apply for this grant. Unless the grant specifically says the building has to be owned by the nonprofit. So there's a few that are like that. Like, and you know, if this is like a question for a specific example that you have, you can always like contact me and we can discuss it further. But yeah, it's like it provides more opportunity to get a lot more funding if it's owned by different people than it's managed. So
Thanks, Kate. And our next couple questions are for Pat and David. So these come from Karen Wilwall in our conservation district. The first is asking if the building has ever experienced flooding from the river.
That's a very good question.
Good question. Yeah.
So when we decided to make the township offices here and renovate the building, well, prior to that, our municipal building was more in the center of town on 291 at 629 North Governor Prince Boulevard. And there are a lot of places in town that experience flooding. We are right at the confluence of the Darby Creek and the Delaware River. At one point, Tinicum was an island, but it's kind of been filled in here and there. So now we're more like a peninsula. But oddly enough, we are about 100 yards from the river. And the answer is no.
We're not in a flood zone.
We have never had, not wood here.
Yeah.
We have never had a flood issue here. Even though we had a dirt basement, the basement was dry at all times. Since we excavated the 18 inches and put in the cement floor, we do have several sump pumps that are installed to, providing the electricity doesn't go out. Although we do have an emergency generator.
Yeah.
We should remain dry at all times. So the answer is no. We have not experienced any flooding, nor do we have any reports of any flooding prior to us occupying the building.
Yeah, that was one of the things that we were concerned about, and we did, we did all our due diligence, and we're actually not in the 100-year floodplain. It's kind of the way it wiggles and waggles around here in town, the way the river flows. We're just fortunate that we had the opportunity, and over the course of all the years it's been here, we have no documentation of any serious flooding this far up into the building.
Well, we certainly hope you guys can keep that track record. Another question Karen posed was if there were any wildlife encounters either in the cupola or anywhere else in the building while it was sitting vacant.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah,
Oh
yeah.
yeah.
Raccoons own the building.
Raccoons, birds, and then
Fox under the porch.
it was unfortunate that a lot of times a bird would get in and would be unable to find its way out. So, yeah, we had to clean up a lot of guano. We had to clean up a lot of droppings.
Yeah.
We had cats. We had a bunch of things. Yes, because windows were broken, doors were missing. So before we were able to acquire it in 2005, and kind of term they used was mothball, which means just kind of like patch it up until we can do something better. Yes, there was quite a bit of wildlife in and out of the building.
There was here after 2005 too, because when we would come in the building, you always made a lot of noise to let the critters know that you were coming, so they would go and hide. We didn't have any bad effects from them, but yes, there's plenty of wildlife down here, and that's for sure.
So speaking of wildlife, the wildlife continues to visit the property. We see bald eagles, we see red-tailed hawks, we still see fox.
Our friendly Canadian geese, we
Geese
have
are all over the
we-
place. So we still have a bit of wildlife that visit us.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. From an anonymous attendee, we had a comment that shared fascinating story, and they also posted the Wikipedia page that has a brief item on the Lazaretto. However, they also recognized it could sorely use some updating. So if anyone in our Tinicum Township crew is willing to take a whack at some Wikipedia page updating, it would certainly be appreciated.
Noted.
Noted.
That's above my pay grade.
That's above my knowledge level.
We'll take a look at it though. We will certainly take a look at it.
We'll get a 15-year-old to look at that.
Maybe
Wonderful.
David Barnes can help with that.
There you go.
Wonderful. So, a couple other questions. This one goes to Kate. So a lot of fascinating examples of adaptive reuse throughout Delaware County today. So thank you for sharing those. Wanted to kind of pick your brain to see about how you would approach either developers or townships that are coming forward and just recognizing that kind of tearing these down and building fresh from the ground up is a much cheaper option. How would you address that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a constant struggle that I have, and a lot of it is, people think that buildings that are listed or eligible for the National Register are protected from demolition, but it's not true. It's only if there is a local municipal preservation ordinance that protects those buildings. And unfortunately, like the majority of the 49 municipalities do not have a preservation ordinance, or a group that would be managing it, such as a historical commission or a HARB. And a HARB is only for like a small portion of the municipality anyway, so it's like only for like a commercial district or a neighborhood. So it doesn't even cover the whole municipality. So the education of municipal officials and to get people who are interested in preservation to encourage their local officials to try and adopt an ordinance to protect these buildings is kind of the first step to have any kind of teeth behind wanting to preserve these buildings. You can show like developers these like the CARE tool or anything like that, any of the economic things that I showed to show as an example of like how you can make it economically feasible. as I, mentioned, like the giant Chester power plant is like a behemoth. It's on the National Register. Chester has it listed only because it's on the National Register on their on a zoning list of buildings that like you can't demolish. Um, but it's like a very short list, and Chester has a whole lot of buildings. Uh, so like they used historic tax credits in order to make that economically feasible. And if you stack the state tax credits on top of the federal tax credits, then it makes it more economically viable. A lot of times they just find it's just easier to just demolish and just rebuild, like build from scratch, because adaptive reuse requires creative thinking and like what you could possibly use it for. And a lot of say like a lot of like corporations and stuff just have like standard boilerplate like templates that they just want to plop down in a blank field, and they don't care what was there before. So it's if there are preservation ordinances that require that the building be saved and look a certain way, um, then corporations will make those changes in order to get that use, that business that they want to put into that location. Um, like Wawas have changed, like national chains have changed their appearances to fit in with local codes. So it is possible to do that. So
Thank you. And just two clarifying points. For those who may not be aware, can you explain what a HARB is?
oh, the HARB, so I'm on the Lansdowne HARB. It's a historical architectural review board. And it's so a historical commission and a HARB, both are appointed by the municipality. It's usually a group of 5 or 7 or so volunteers that have some knowledge and expertise about architecture and preservation. Uh, and they review applications for alterations or demolitions within a municipality. So a HARB is for, like the Lansdowne HARB is only for the commercial district. It doesn't include the 2 National Register districts that are in Lansdowne. Um, but the Radnor HARB includes like 3 different districts, and it's mostly residential, and it doesn't include the downtown district. So it kind of changes in whatever town you're in.
Thank you. And popcorning back over to Pat and Dave did have a question as well. Clarifying point on the history. So when the building was serving as a quarantine station, were there ever patients coming into the building, or were they remaining on the ships?
You still can.
Yes, patients were in the building. Both. I don't know how they determined which group was which, but there were patients that remained on the ships, and there were patients in the building. If I could, I will try to go back, if you'll allow me to, share my screen. So in the center of the building here, can you see that? What I'm pointing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
This is the center of the building, which is where the doctor's offices were, nurses' stations, etc. It's where the administration of the hospital went on. And there are 2 identical wings on either side. That was the hospital side. That's where patients were. And you cannot get from the center portion to either wing internally. You had to exit the front door and then walk along the porch and enter here. I guess that was way back when, that was how they determined they could stop cross-contamination. So yes, the 2 wings housed patients, and the center wing housed the medical staff. There was also a building here behind the trees, which still exists, that was the surgeon's quarters, where the doctor lived. But yes, there were patients both on the ship in the river and here. And unfortunately, as you can imagine, there were a number that passed from the whatever disease they were suffering from. And in the front of the building, my mistake, in the back of the building towards Second Street, there is a little memorial cemetery with a little plaque there dedicated to those that did pass away during this time. So yeah, there were patients both on and off the ship during that period.
And there's in the book, there's one instance where they had multiple ships that were quarantined, multiple sick people, and they had nowhere to. They literally they were triaging them on the front lawn. They had tents set up, so the whole grounds were used at different times depending on the disease level. They've used all the property, everything available to treat these people. And you know, in a large majority of them, they were very successful with the treatment of the people. The majority of the people got better. I
Yes.
mean, it was really amazing. The survival rate at what they did was really amazing for the times. The survival rate was really outstanding. So yeah, there's a couple of articles. I mean, a couple of things in the book that describe how, you know, you just like everybody else, you get overwhelmed with a disease comes, and they've had multiple ships quarantined, multiple people working, and also you have to remember that people weren't happy to be staying here. If they were feeling good and you had to stay, I don't know what that was, but yeah. So they also had the issue of people trying to break quarantine. So that you have to remember that too. So it was a secure area at times because you're literally only, you know, I guess in that time it would be you would be travel by horse and buggy. You're not that far away from the city. So, but to answer the question, yeah, it was the whole property was used at different times depending on the disease level.
Also, the quarantine was very controversial
Yeah.
because you had the merchants, the pirates of industry, the captains of industry in Philadelphia, who couldn't do their business if their ships were being quarantined. So the whole concept of quarantine was very controversial,
Yeah.
and a lot of people didn't like it.
Yeah.
They wanted their merchandise. They wanted to buy and sell and make money and what have you. The longer the ship was in port and not transporting goods, it wasn't making any money.
Yeah, and also a lot of the stuff was perishable. So a lot of cargo was just you know these merchants they paid and it was just destroyed at different times. So yeah, it was an interesting time. If you get a chance, David is Dr. Barnes's book and is very in depth. It's 15 years to research it. So he did his due diligence.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. So, we do have one final question to close out today's session, and this is from Naimul Islam. And their question states, do you acknowledge that the complex past and using these sites to educate and foster dialogue about difficult chapters in American history while preserving the historical and architectural buildings? And they further explain, for example, restoring and preserving buildings like slave quarters, plantation houses, and sites connected to the Underground Railroad.
I'm guessing that's for me.
Sure.
Yeah, that's a very loaded and complicated question to end with. There's a lot of examples that are the National Trust for Historic Preservation has a monthly magazine that they put out, and they routinely show examples of buildings such as plantation houses and slave quarters that are being interpreted differently, and and even like some other sites that like are just kind of uh like recently found to be have enslaved people or be connected to the Underground Railroad. So a lot of historic sites are kind of opening up to uh showing more of like that kind of interpretation of their site, to be more inclusive and show the entire history of the building and not just an old, old rich white guy kind of perspective. Because a lot, and also showing like the Native Americans and the women that were also involved with it. Like those are also um uh you know people that have historically been marginalized in the telling of history. So in the past maybe 10 years, it's gotten a lot better to show that, like, the different interpretation of those sites. But I encourage you to go into the National Trust website, because they have a saving places, like stories and stuff. So they have a lot of blogs about that kind of stuff, and you can see a lot of examples. And I know, like, in Chester County, they have an Underground Railroad, the Kennett Underground Railroad Center. And so they have tours of Underground Railroad sites in Kennett Square and the surrounding areas. And there's a Harriet Tubman Byway, which went basically from, like, Maryland all the way through Philadelphia. And we're trying to identify the sites, like, in Delaware County. But one of the hard parts about the Underground Railroad is that it is intentionally secretive. So nobody was really like, hey, this was, an Underground Railroad site. So they're, like, in Upper Darby, they've identified a bunch, and there's a walking tour you can do, or a driving tour of Underground Railroad sites. And there's been some research done in Chester City about those locations. So they do exist. It's just not like a fully, like, comprehensive, this is where everything was, but it's generally around the Quaker meeting houses. So Darby Borough, uh, Providence, like those kind of places have a lot of Underground Railroad sites.
Thank you. And to close out our session, I'll pass it back to Sue.
Thank you, Becca. This is such a fascinating topic. We are just about out of time, and I will tell you, I'm sure we could go on for another half hour or so, but unfortunately, we have to close our session today. I want to thank all of our wonderful speakers for their informative topics and history in Delaware County. Again, very fascinating to me personally. And I'd also like to thank all of you who participated and watched this presentation in today's session. Following the close of this session, you're going to be asked to provide your feedback to our speakers in a brief Zoom survey. We would appreciate your time in completing this form. The next session in the 4th Annual Sustainability Conference, Our Homes, Our Health, Understanding and Acting on Environmental Exposures in Delaware County, will be presented today at 3 p.m. If you did not sign up prior, please visit our website at www.delcopa.gov/sustainability/conference to sign up. Finally, we would like to invite all of you to attend our closing keynote celebration this Saturday, June 14th, at the Lazaretto in Tinicum Township. This event will include a breakfast and a keynote presentation from none other than the legendary Glenn the Hurricane Schwartz. I'm sure many of you know who he is, our meteorologist here in Philadelphia. And that will be followed by an EV Expo networking with more than 30 local organizations. And you too will get firsthand viewing of the historic Lazaretto Quarantine Station, because the networking will be done there, as well as museum tours. They have a wonderful Italian museum and a wonderful Swedish museum in the building. So please, walk-ins are welcome. Come join us on Saturday. And thank you all again for your participation in the 4th Annual Delaware County Sustainability Conference. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye-bye.